Welcome to day 40. Today we are going to explore time. Activity 1. Before we begin with today's lesson, can you remember how many hours are there in one day? Did you say 24? Good job if you did. There are 24 hours in one day. Now let's have a look at this clock. This clock is showing us the short arm, and we know that the short arm shows us the hours. This clock is showing us 1 hour. Now let's take a closer look at this clock. This clock still shows us the hour hand, and the hour hand is pointing to the number 2. How many hours is this clock showing us? Did you say 2 hours? Good job if you did. This clock is showing us 2 hours. Now let's take a look at this clock. Can you do this one on your own? We'll check the answer shortly. Activity 2. Before we begin, can you remember how many minutes are there in 1 hour? Did you say 60? Good job if you did. There are 60 minutes in 1 hour. Now let's take a closer look at this clock. We have one hand on this clock, and it's a long hand, and that long hand is pointing to the number 1. What does the long hand on the clock tell us? The long hand on the clock tells us minutes. If the long hand is pointing to the 1, that tells us 5 minutes. Now let's have a look at this clock. We have one hand on this clock. It is a long hand, that tells us minutes. And the long hand is pointing to the number 7. Let's try counting in 5s for each of the numbers on the clock from 1 until we get to 7. Let's start at the 1. 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35. The long hand is pointing to the 7. It is 35 minutes past. Now try this one on your own, and we will check the answer shortly. The long hand on this clock is pointing to the number 9, and this tells us that it is 45 minutes past.